Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 246 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is being present. Our quote of the day comes to us from Jim Elliot. Wherever you are, be all there. I'm honored to bring you today's episode. I originally met our guest today after reading one of his books and reaching out to him. We had a really cool conversation before we even decided to record the podcast. Neil Pasricha absolutely delivers some value bombs today, and he made me think a lot about truly being present and the role technology and specifically our phones play in our lives every single day. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Neil, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to bring it today?
I am ready to bring it. It's brought. It's here. I have it with me.
All right. So the number one objective of our show is to both motivate and inspire our listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you have either a no-quit story of your own or perhaps a really challenging time where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
I have a lot of stories like that. I think the one that comes to mind first is after my wife left me and my best friend took his own life, I was really struggling. This is about 10 years ago. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. I lost 40 pounds to distress. I had black bags under my eyes, and nothing seemed to be going right. I had to sell my house. I had to write a eulogy. I had to file for a divorce. And it was at that time, that no quit time of my life, where I started a blog called 1000awesomethings.com just to cheer myself up. So, Chris, every single day for the next 1,000 days, I wrote a little essay about something that made me smile, like getting called up to the dinner buffet first at a wedding, flipping to the cold side of the pillow in the middle of the night, or finally peeing after holding it forever. And that blog started to slowly put my brain into a positive frame of mind. And as the blog became more successful, eventually winning the International Academy of Digital Arts and Sciences award for best blog in the world 2 years in a row and scoring like 50 million hits, I found that I was now writing for not just me, but for an audience. And so it became a sort of gigantic sun in the solar system of my mind. That was the biggest thing I have gone through personally in my entire life, and that blog became a salvation.
You know, I'll touch on your book in a minute, but I think what you just touched on is the importance of how you start something and all of a sudden, like you said, 1,000 days later. And the best part about that story was you touched on the success you had in regards to awards and things right at the very end. You talked about how it changed you and more importantly, how it started from a negative place in your life and you turned it into a positive. So I wanted to just ask you quickly, if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do today.
Sure. My name is Neil Pasricha. I think, write, and speak about intentional living. I have written 7 books under the concept of gratitude, which is the Book of Awesome. That is originally my blog post, just printed out and stapled together from the blog I just mentioned. Then I've written a book called The Happiness Equation, which is all about happiness. And most recently, I just released a new book called You Are Awesome, which is all about resilience. The subtitle, because I'm sort of like pegged to that awesome phrase now. So really the subtitle sort of gives away the thesis of what I'm focusing on here, which is how to navigate change, wrestle with failure, and live an intentional life. So I'm writing, thinking, and speaking about how to live a great life, how to live intentionally.
Your new book, which you mentioned, You Are Awesome, is such a powerful book, and I love how it's such a bright color orange on the cover. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you one specific question. If you had to define yourself, but you could only use one word, what word would you pick?
Here. Like, the reason I said that word here, H-E-R-E, as opposed to, and I had to spell it because it's a podcast, you might be like, is it H-E-A-R? But the reason I picked that word as opposed to say awesome, or as opposed to say sort of anything that's come out of my books, or as opposed to say son or husband or father, which also came to mind, is because ultimately what I'm trying to do for myself and for everybody throughout all my work is just help us focus on the present. Just help us be here. Just help us, if I am with my children, help me be with my children, not look at my cell phone, not get annoyed about something related to work or the fact that I burned my finger while making dinner. Just be with my children. If I am writing books or doing this podcast, for example, like be in the podcast. Before we started this conversation, it might sound silly, but I came down, I put my 1-year-old baby to bed for his morning nap. Then I came down to the basement, I closed the door, I turned off my cell phone, I plugged in my headphones that I bought specifically, to do the podcast. I have everything else on my computer closed. Like, I'm here. I'm just doing this. And if I can do that over and over and over again, then life actually doesn't feel short. It actually feels long. You live in a series of infinite presence. And as a result, the love you give off and the love you get in just, I find, goes up exponentially.
I think it's really neat how you discussed what you did in regards to putting your child down for the nap and then going down to the basement, headphones, phone off, computer off. It's something that I've been working on myself, is focusing on whatever it is that I'm doing. And I'd be lying if I said I'm perfect all the time. And unfortunately, sometimes what I actually have to do is take my phone and put it in another room so I can focus on what I'm doing. So I think it's really important how you shared that, and it's great advice for our listeners, because I think we all get distracted with technology. We get distracted with TV and the internet, and I think it's important, like you said, whatever you're focusing on, it could be 5 minutes, it could be an hour, do that one thing and don't do anything else.
Have you heard of something called the Palm Box?
No.
POMBOX. Okay, so I write a bi-weekly article on intentional living on my website, off of my website, neil.blog. And this week I wrote something called 10 ways to have a more productive day. And one thing I wrote about was exactly what you just said, putting yourself in another room, or in my case, I give it to my wife and tell her to hide it. And then one of my readers wrote back to me and said, you should get Palm Box. I was like, what's Palm Box? So anyway, I have no affiliation with this company, but I'm just telling everyone because I've become super enamored with it over the last 24 hours. The website is getpalmbox.com, GETPOMBOX.com. I don't get nothing for saying that, but it's this beautiful wood carved little box. You open it with a code, you set a timer based on the time of the day, and you put your cell phone in it, and then you close it. And so the woman who wrote me an email, her name was Amanda, she said, me and my husband come home at 5:30 from work, we put our phones in the Palm Box, and we set it to 8:30. And then we are forcing ourselves to be intentional for 3 hours with our children and spending the night together, and then we can get our phones back. And I was like, wow, I just think in the world today, because self-and addiction is skyrocketing and because it's having so many detrimental effects on our mind, and we can talk about that if you want, I talk about it a little bit in my book, this Palm Box idea is I think it's great.
That is awesome.
I just took us way off topic, sorry, but I just wanted to tell you that.
No, that's one of the best parts of the show is, as you know, having a podcast also and being a guest on many is, you lay out the interviews and you have some questions and things. But I think it's really neat when the conversation goes in different places. But if I get nothing out of this, if the listeners get nothing out of this, and I think they're going to get a ton out of this show because we'll go into your book in a second, but I think that's awesome. And you put something in a box and you can't use it. It's very easy for me or you when we're having dinner together to say, hey, put your phone away, and all of a sudden it vibrates or, it beeps and you just pick it up. But when it's in that box and it sets a timer with a code, that's awesome. I'm definitely going to check it out, and I will recommend our listeners checking it out as well.
Great.
So going to your book, and like I said before we went live, I thought it was just an amazing book, and I think it's a simple read, and I don't mean that in any disrespect. I mean that in the sense of, I think a lot of times in today's day and age, people talk about how they don't have time for books and it needs hours upon hours. Your book was a simple read the way it's written, and I mean that with utmost respect, because it was such an easy read to flow, and I took so much out of that. So one of the things you touch on in your book is the concept and the idea of failures and how you look at them, and I was curious if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners a little bit about how you look at failures and how it actually impacts you in a positive way. Sure, absolutely. Well, basically, I think the world today that we live in is too easy. I mean, I just really do. None of us that I know of personally, if you're listening to this, you're probably living in a first world country. You probably aren't going through a famine or fighting through a plague or any sort of severe poverty. You and your friends aren't getting shipped off to war against your will, which happened not too long ago for many of us. And
And so we actually have it pretty good. We live in the most abundant time ever in human civilization with longer lifespans, higher education rates, and more money, frankly, than ever before. So, unfortunately, the side effect of all of that, like that we live in an awesome world today, we're running water in your taps, you can marry who you want, you can live where you please. Like this is good. We have it good. But the side effect is we no longer have the tools to handle failure or even perceived failure because most of us haven't gone through anything serious. Unfortunately, life, does exist and you're going to go through maybe a divorce in my case that I didn't expect, maybe the loss of a job that you don't see coming, or there's a big layoff and you're affected. You might lose someone close to you way earlier than you think. And so I have found in my own life that because I went through the 1980s and grew up with like gold stars and participation ribbons for all, I know I didn't have the infrastructure inside myself, inside my mind, inside my body to handle when I went through my divorce. It's 10 years ago. That's why I'm able to talk about it now, because I was a wreck. I was a mess. I could not handle it. And I look around these days and I look at anxiety rates are spiking, loneliness rates are spiking, depression rates are spiking, suicide rates are spiking. And what I see is a whole army of porcelain dolls. And I'm talking about all of us. We get 2 likes on a photo, we think, I got no friends. You get a rude email from your boss, you think, I can't go to work tomorrow. I better call in sick. We can't handle it. And so how do I talk about failure? This is it. We don't have enough of it. We aren't experiencing enough of it. We don't developing thick skin at a young enough age. So if you're like me, you have to build it at a later age. That's why I wrote this book. The reason I wrote You Are Awesome is to help me build thicker skin, to help me think about how to navigate change and circumstances and failure in order to be resilient. It's a hard skill to build. I think it is the most vital skill to build in the world today that I'm talking about resilience. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to either teach our kids how to be resilient if we have children. And if we don't, then we have to teach ourselves. And so all You Are Awesome is, as you know from reading it, is a series of 9, I call them secrets. That was just a holdover from my last book, where the happiness equation, where I called them secrets. But you could call them 9 chapters or 9 lessons of things we can do in order to develop a more resilient mind.
No, I think the word resilient is so important in today's times, because I think we do live in a world, and I have 3 young kids myself, and they get participation trophies and medals and things. And I think to an extent, when
how old are your kids?
10, 8, and just 7.
Yeah, see, I've got 5, 3, and 1, and my 5-year-old joined the T-ball team. And this summer I was supposed to be like one of the assistant coaches, but I travel so much giving speeches, I wasn't able to go there till like the 2nd or 3rd time, and I didn't know the rules. So my 5-year-old like hits the ball and then runs, but he's out. Like he didn't make it in time. And they're like, no, you get to go, you get to stay on first base. And I'm like, why? He's out. And they're like, no, everyone gets a single. I was like, okay. And then every kid goes through the lineup. The last kid gets a grand slam every inning. So the next inning comes around, and I guess I haven't learned my lesson. So my kid fields the ball, and I was like, throw it at the guy. So he throws it, whips it right off the kid's back, which he shouldn't do. He's supposed to throw it to the first baseman. And I was like, woo, like he's out. And again, they're like, nobody's out. And I'm like, this is bad. Like you can't, I don't think then I'm obviously in the minority because I'm overruled by like my, tyrannical softball league or a T-ball league for my 5-year-old. But I'm like, why are we teaching kids that nobody can get out? Like nobody can get out ever? I don't know. I just think there's something wrong with that.
I could not agree more. I think all 3 of my kids played different sports, and similar to your 5-year-old, started at a younger age. And don't get me wrong, I think it's important for everybody to have an opportunity and have a chance to play. But just what you said is, we don't live in a world where everybody wins no matter what. And that doesn't mean, your son gets out once and then he never plays the rest of the season. But the reality is, in baseball, if your son gets out in the 1st or 2nd inning, he's got another chance. He's also 5 years old. But I do agree with you. I think there should be a perspective of, learning the competition the right way, obviously fair play and all those things. But I think it's very difficult when we have this, everybody gets safe, everybody gets a home run. And I just think it leads to different things down the road, especially when sports and school becomes more competitive.
I remember when I was a kid in like, say, 4th grade, throughout the entire year, one kid in my class had a cast. Like somebody's leg was in a cast, or somebody's arm was in a cast, or someone, and everybody signed the cast, and it was fun, and they had like a whole cast. It was like, I swear, I don't see any kids in casts anymore. And I'm not advocating like let's break our children's bones. But what I'm saying is, look, the reason the most popular blog post I ever wrote on 1000things.com was old dangerous playground equipment was because many of us missed the idea that you could fail, that you could fall off a rusty slide and land on a pile of cigarette butts and milk thistles. You can't do that anymore. It's all padded. You know, you even in the softball, or I keep saying softball because that's what I play, even in the t-ball thing, it's like the kid who gets out learns that that's okay. If they never get out, then when they finally get out in like high school or college, they can't handle it, so they quit the team. So that's the problem.
Yeah, I think you just brought up a really interesting point. Is, you know, if everybody is safe all the time, and your son fast forwards now, he's in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, and all of a sudden he gets out for the first time, he's gonna have no idea what do you mean I'm out? No, like I'm always safe. Everybody's safe, and you know, how do you teach a kid? How do you teach a team certain things like that? And I just think it's a different perspective and a different time we're living in. But want to change lanes for a second. And one of the things we always look to do is add value to our listeners. And we often discuss the importance of a morning routine. And I love your 2-minute morning practice, especially how it correlates to our 1,000 minutes per day. I just wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind expanding on that for a minute.
Absolutely. So listen, when I stand up in front of an audience, I say, how many people sleep within 10 feet of their cell phone? And honestly, Chris, like 99% of people raise their hand. It's like almost everybody. And then I say to the room, okay, if you drank a bottle of wine before bed every night, if you drank a bottle of wine when you woke up every morning, and you slept with a bottle of wine within 10 feet of your pillow every night, we would all look and call you an alcoholic. But because it's a cell phone, we haven't yet got the language in our society to be able to declare you a phoneaholic, although you are. All of us are. And we can't see that addiction because we all have it. The issue with phones is the research is out there now. You know that looking at a bright screen within an hour of bedtime reduces your melatonin production. We know it is killing our productivity. 31% of our time is now bookmarking, prioritizing, and switching between tasks, not actually doing anything. If you've ever stared at like a Netflix screen, like frozen because you can't figure out like what movie to pick next, you know what I'm talking about. And third is psychologically, we always feel lesser than. You never feel good enough. No matter how good your lunch is today, somebody did a lobster buffet in the Maldives on Instagram. So it's just, you're going to look like, you're going to feel like a failure. So what's the solution? I say to build resilience, to build mental strength, I have developed a simple 2-minute morning system, totally backed by research, where you wake up and before you go to bed, you grab a pen, you grab a note card or a journal. I use a journal, and you write down 3 things. I will let go of, I am grateful for, and I will focus on. I will let go of allows you to crystallize and eject an anxiety. I will let go of the 5 pounds I gained over Thanksgiving. I will let go of comparing my book to Tim Ferriss's books. If I compare myself to Tim Ferriss, I'll never sell enough copies. I will let go of making the New York Times bestseller list. I'm recording this with you just after the book came out. I was told we sold 7,500 copies the first week in the United States. And the top 10 books of the New York Times bestseller list, 3 of them sold more than that. 3. But we didn't make it because it's editorialized and I don't get a say in it. So I have to let go of that. I can't hold on to that. Otherwise, I'm just stabbing myself in the gut for no reason. So that's I will let go of. And the research is in Science magazine that shows that when we crystallize and eject our anxieties, we reduce our regrets and we increase our contentment. Most of us used to have a way to do this through religion, like the Catholic confession chamber or Buddhism, Mormonism, Judaism, Islam. They all have ways of releasing anxieties. However, today, the fastest growing religion is actually no religion, according to National Geographic. So in this increasingly secular society, we need to bake back into our lives a form of contemporary confession. I will let go of, as simple as it sounds, is actually putting in a strong mental practice every morning. Okay? Number 2 is I am grateful for. I won't go on as big a rant on this one, although I easily could. It's just important to start priming your brain for positivity because our brains, physiologically, they want to focus on the negative. We have something in the middle of our brain called our amygdala. It fires fight or flight hormones at us all day, and that's why we rubberneck when we're driven by a traffic accident. That's why we want to read the bad news that's scrolling across the CNN screen. We all want to see it. Our brains are programmed for 200,000 years of evolution to look for problems and solve problems. That's how we took over the planet because we outthought saber-toothed tigers. We know how to kill other things that are going to kill us. Unfortunately, today, in this era of abundance, we don't need that anymore. What we actually need is an ability to focus on the positive. I am grateful for lets you do that. Write down a few small specific things. They have to be specific. You can't say my husband. You have to say, my husband Rodriguez putting the toilet seat down. You can't say my kid. You have to say, like, my 7-year-old painting me a drawing of the sailboat that we're going to be in the summer. Like, it has to be specific, okay? And the third one is I will focus on. Right now, one area that's affecting our mental resilience is decision fatigue. We are all making over 200 decisions a day, and as a result, we feel totally mentally exhausted by like lunchtime. I will focus on lets you carve one will do from your endless could do and should do. Okay, it reduces decision fatigue, and at the end of the day or the next day, you simply cross it off your list. In summary, the 2-minute morning practice is I will let go of, I am grateful for, and I will focus on.
I think it is an awesome 2 minutes, and it's something that, as I said before, we touch on every show, is asking our guests for their morning routine. And I think the reason why I love this is because it's 2 minutes. And one of the things you spoke about in the book is the average person has about 1,000 minutes per day where they're awake. So the reality is what you're talking about is 2 1,000ths. And if you think about everybody with all these distractions and, like you said, over 200 decisions, 2 minutes out of 1,000 is something that everybody can do. And it's why I love this question, because one of the things I want to share with our listeners all the time is different ideas and different concepts. And the one thing that I'm very specific about is there is not one size fits all for everybody. And it's why I love this question, because it allows our guests to share their things, what's worked for you, what works in your life, and it makes other people think, hey, you know what, maybe instead of doing an hour, I can do 2 minutes, or maybe instead of doing 30 seconds, I can do 3 minutes. So I really appreciate you touching on that. And I wanted to get your perspective on something you just said too, as you talked about decision fatigue and how we make over 200 decisions each day. I wanted to kind of pick your brain for a second. I personally feel, and you talked about cell phone and phoneaholic and all those different things. I think personally, cell phones and technology is adding to so much stress and anxiety, and social media, it's the comparison, competing with the Joneses. Wanted to get your perspective if you think a lot of the decision fatigue we have is based on cell phones.
I hate cell phones. I think they're a huge problem in society. We are trading in convenience, access, and information for our mental health. So that rant I went on a few minutes ago, I won't repeat it for the listeners, but like there's 3 P's of problems with cell phones. The first P is physical. That's the melatonin issue. Like, we're not sleeping well. So as a result, when you don't sleep well, you have low resilience in the morning. So then you check your phone again to see what Trump tweeted about. Number 2 is productivity. McKinsey says we now spend 31% of our day bookmarking, prioritizing, and switching between tasks. We're not actually doing anything. We're just deciding what to do. And you can relate to this. We're just like always floating around on our phones. We're not actually doing anything. We're just like picking at this, picking at that, scrolling at this. I'll take a look and check my fantasy football score. Like, oh, any new likes on Instagram? Oh, what's up? Like, you're just like bouncing around like a chipmunk, right? And the third one is physiological. Or not physiological, that's the first one. The third one's psychological, comparing everyone else's greatest hits to our directors, because you can't be the best at anything anymore. When I grew up, you could be the best high school basketball player in your high school. Now, somebody's better on YouTube. You can't have more, like, I don't know how many downloads your podcast gets, but I have a feeling you know which ones get more than you. And the people that get more than you, I bet you they know the people that get more than them. And even if you're Oprah on Twitter with 10 million followers, you're looking at Bieber with 15 million. Like, you can't win. You can't win. There's always somebody more. So those 3 things are causing a huge decline in our mental health. And let me just back this up with a bit of research. Dr. Jean Twenge at San Diego University published an amazing report showing that the 30% skyrocketing rate of anxiety, especially amongst adolescents, especially amongst girls, is due, and she put it right in the white paper, to the ascendance of the smartphone. That's why I'm advertising this Palm box that I just heard about to lock it up. That's why today, for me, I'm after this podcast. I have one more interview, but I've been like going 18-hour days like on the book tour for You Are Awesome. Well, today I've promised my wife I'm giving her my cell phone. I will turn it off, and she's not allowed to give it back to me for 3 days, so I can like have a little bit of a detox. Because of course we're all going to lean into it. It's super convenient. It's super productive. We get so much, we have information that at our fingertips. But unfortunately, we have to pull back from these things. The simplest way to start, by the way, if you're listening to this, you're like, yeah, I can't do the no cell phone for 3 days. Well, I'll tell you the simplest way to start. Think about where your charger is in your house and move it 1 floor or 2 floors away from your bed. Okay? So I now plug myself into the basement. Another simple way to start is it's like a hashtag thing. It's put forward by a company called Common Sense Media, but it's called hashtag device free dinners. They did a big campaign with Will Ferrell. And you should check out this campaign online. It's hilarious. It's like Will Ferrell has this like dad like looking at his cell phone while all the other family members are trying to talk to him, which is really funny because they're like, "Oh, I miss Dad." They're like, "I know." And it sounds like he's dead, and then the camera pans over, and he's like just right there, like playing Angry Birds, you know. So hashtag device free dinner, meaning as it sounds, just make a rule in your house that you can't have any devices at your dinner table. Start with that. Like these are some really basic things that 5 years ago nobody would like even think these were special, but today these are like incredibly these are like eye-opening ideas because we're also addicted.
It's so interesting that you touched on the device-free dinners. My ex-wife and my 3 kids and I were at dinner, I want to say 4 years ago, and we looked at the table next to us, and there was a mother, father, and a son and a daughter. And I want to say daughter was probably 10 to 12 and son was probably 6 to 8. And all 4 of them were on their, parents were on their cell phones. The older daughter had a cell phone and the son had some type of tablet. And all 4 of them, I kid you not, for about 20 minutes were doing something and no one said anything. And I looked over and I referenced a couple times and I said to myself, that's really sad. And I think it's amazing how people can allow those things to take such control of them. So with that in mind, one of the things you touch on in the book is the idea untouchable days. And I wanted to just get your quick perspective on that because I think it's really important in many ways.
Sure. And just to close up, like I think of myself as an extremely non-judgmental person. So if I saw a family like that, I'd probably think to myself, well, they're trying to manage themselves. Maybe they had it was a tough day or whatever. But I will tell you, the world we live in, it makes it harder for us to do that. Like, for example, we just bought a new van because we also have 3 children. And I had to pay extra. I had to pay more money to get no TV screens in them because everybody gets the option with the TV screen. So I was like, well, how do you get no screens? I don't want to have big screens in my van. I want my kids like staring at that all on every road trip. And they're like, oh, well, the only way to do that is you have to like upgrade and then like choose a different option. Like you have to upgrade to a higher package and then like choose the other, like the sound system option. But nobody ever does that because who cares about sound? And I was like, I do. I actually don't care about sound, but I want no screen. So I had to pay more money for that. I'm just telling you as an example that sometimes we have to work extra hard to get rid of them.
That's crazy. That concept is just absolutely crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Now, untouchable days. This is related. And you got me all frothing at the mouth here because there's things I'm really passionate about. So because the world is so overwhelming right now, and even though we live in the era of infinite abundance, we live like kings lived 50 years ago, we don't feel that way. We feel trapped. We feel judged. We feel anxious. We feel endlessly compared to other people. We don't feel pretty. I actually stood in front of you won't believe this, but I stood in front of a college audience a few months ago, and it was like, I don't know, a few hundred people. But they're all beautiful. Like they're beautiful, 20, 21, 22-year-old men and women, okay? And I said, how many people in this room feel beautiful and think that they are good looking? And nobody did. Even and I'm talking, I'm not trying to, I don't want to sound like some creepy old dude like giving a speech, but I'm like they're beautiful people, kids, right? And they are taking care of themselves and they're working out and they're going to the gym and they're running and they're doing stuff that nobody. When I was in college, like we had people of all shapes and sizes. Do you know what I mean? And now it's like everybody looks like a model and they don't feel like they're good. Like that's the thing that was so crazy to me is that they actually think they look terrible, which is so crazy to me. But untouchable days are a way to unplug from the matrix. Right now, the average person gets 147 emails a day. And I did not make up that number. It's from Baden, a research firm. And the average person touches their cell phone 2,500 times a day. Again, I did not make up that number. 2,500 times a day is like a real statistic, which kind of makes it sound like a constant fondle, right? This thing. Wow. So if we are permanently, we're only one step away from having a chip in the back of our neck. And if you walk around on any subway platform, you see everybody head down looking at their cell phone. We're just a second away from that. So I say we all have NDD, which is nature deficit disorder. I say your brain gets its most creative ideas when it mentally unfurls itself from all the sleeping bags it's rolled up in, and you let it like ferment and froth and just wildly think about different things. Those thinking patterns are lost for most of us, myself included, because we don't daydream anymore. We don't wander anymore. We don't kind of just go for strolls at lunchtime anymore. And so we have to bake them back into our system. I have gone really hard at this. I now schedule one untouchable day every single week. What is an untouchable day? It is a day where I'm completely unreachable by anyone, in any way, in any form, all day. I mean, no one can text me. No one can email me. Why? Do I have a backpack? Yes. Do I still have my laptop in it? Yeah. Do I have my phone in it? I do, or sometimes I don't take it. But either way, they're off. And if I do have my laptop, it's for writing, and I don't go on the internet. I just like flip it open into Microsoft Word. Guess what? I am 10 times more productive on untouchable days. I will write 500 words on a normal day. I will write 5,000 words on an untouchable day. Like I wrote You Are Awesome, my new book, on untouchable days. That's how I wrote it. People are like, oh, how'd you write a book about one to write one? How'd you write 7? I'm like, untouchable days. You have to schedule one day a week where you're totally unplugged. And for anyone listening to this, like, you don't get it. I'm an ER nurse. Like, I can't just like wander off and stroll through the park a day a week. I'm like, okay, but can you take an untouchable lunch? So many of us are voluntarily tethering ourselves to the matrix. When I was working at Walmart, and by the way, I worked there for 10 years, we would all take our cell phones at lunch, hop into someone's Toyota Camry, and like take a vote on like, well, we're going to go to the pita place or like the chicken place. I'm saying no. Leave your cell phone at your desk. You get an hour for lunch. Don't go in the Toyota Camry to the chicken place. Wander down to the park. So let yourself off the hook for an hour. Take an untouchable lunch. If you can, broaden it to an untouchable afternoon, depending on what kind of job you have. If it's a creative job, or I don't know what kind of job you have, but like if you can, do it. And guess what will happen? You will be more turbocharged for the afternoon. You will have better ideas, and you will move from doing things right to doing the right things. Untouchable days have become my secret weapon, and I'm telling you the truth, Chris, when I say next year, I'm scheduling 2 of them a week.
I absolutely love that, and I think it's so key, and I hope our listeners got what you said near the end, is if you're an ER nurse, if you can't take an entire untouchable day, how about taking an untouchable hour or an untouchable meal? And 2 weeks ago, I spoke at a large real estate convention, and I was talking about the concept of airplane mode, and something very similar to this. It was before I read your book, so maybe I might have even titled it the same thing. But people were putting their hands up, and I asked them to then give me, all the reasons, all the excuses why, and they said, well, I have clients and I have showings, and I said, okay. I said, how about this? I said, what about 15 minutes or 20 minutes on airplane mode? What about a half hour? So for our listeners out there, if you have kids, if you have spouses, if you have jobs where you can't unplug for, like Neil said, for an entire day, how about 1 hour, one meal, where you say, you know what, I'm going to go to Starbucks and I'm going to sit down and read or write or do something. So I think that's awesome how you touched on that, because I think the reality is we all can't take an entire day or two per week based on circumstances, but every single listener can take a half hour or an hour each day to do something for themselves where they unplug.
That's right. And by the way, Chris, a lot of people say, oh, Neil, it's so easy for you to say that. You're a writer. But what they don't get is that I'm a writer because I do that. I don't do it because I'm a writer. I'm a writer because I do it. The difference is I'm enabling this lifestyle that I have because of the untouchable days. They actually are like a leading indicator, not a lagging indicator of who I am.
That's awesome. So I'm curious to get your answer on this. Excluding your books, so none of your books count, especially your new one, which is You Are Awesome. Is there anything that you've read recently or you're reading that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Sure. And I haven't mentioned it yet, which is because it's not part of my new book, but I actually run a books podcast. So my podcast is called 3 Books. I'm on a 15-year-long quest to uncover the 1,000 most formative books in the world. I am publishing a new chapter on the exact minute of every single full moon and new moon all the way up to September 1st, 2031. And I'm flying around the world, chatting with people like Malcolm Gladwell, Mitch Albom, Judy Blume, David Sedaris, Chris Anderson of TED. And I asked them which 3 books most changed their lives. Why do I mention all that? Because before I sit down with them, I actually get their 3 most formative books, and then I read them in advance of the conversation. So this is actually a hugely selfish project, just to enable me to read what I consider the 1,000 most formative books in the world. And it's not just like authors. I've actually talked to like the world's greatest Uber driver, like a guy with like a 4.99 rating and 5,000 rides. And I did the interview in the back of his Uber. And what I found is that everybody has got books that have touched them, and I have read almost none of them because a million new books are published a year. 100 million books, or there's over 100 million books on Amazon today. So we've got no hope and we've got no chances of finding a good one. So you asked me specifically, can I tell you one book that's really changed me? Yeah, sure, I'll give you one. It would be The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. I don't know if you've read it or not.
I have not.
Okay, so this book essentially defines a black swan event. So Nassim Taleb is like one of these genius behavioral economists, but he defines a black swan event as like a disproportionately huge event that we can quote unquote explain in the rearview mirror as if we knew it was coming, like the success of the iPhone or how you met your spouse or 9/11. And but we can't see it coming. We have no idea that it's coming because the world is so chaotic that, if anything, what you need to do to live your life is expose yourself to more and more black swan opportunities. Expose yourself to more and more like spins of the roulette wheel where you put a chip on every number. And so the thesis of the book, which is how I try to live my life today, is do as many different things as you can. You will avoid cognitive entrenchment, which is a phrase I just learned, and you will increase your mental anti-fragility, which is another word for resilience. I tell you honestly, that's why I started that podcast. That's why I do Untouchable Days. I do all these random weird things because it's like putting a chip on every number on the roulette wheel. It's like the chances that one of the things I try will do well goes up because I'm doing more things.
That is really, really cool, and I have listened to your podcast, and I think it's awesome that you read the books before, and I too myself am an avid reader, so that is really cool, and I have not read The Black Swan, so I will definitely read that. So Neil, I know time is of the essence. I wanted to ask you if you would selfishly please tell our listeners the best way for them to find you, follow you, find out more about you, as well as where they can get all your books as well as your podcast.
Sure. www.neil.blog, Neil.blog is my home. And I love people who listen to the end of the podcast. So I will tell you my personal email address. I only do this at the very end of podcasts that I love doing because I just love hearing from interesting people. So my email address is neil@globalhappiness.org. That's neil@globalhappiness.org. If something resonated with you, drop me a line and maybe it's CC Chris.
That is awesome. I absolutely love that, and I do the same thing whenever I'm on a show, as I always leave my personal email address. So last question for you is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
Oh, so many. Look, be here. This is all you got. What else are you doing right now? Are you at the gym? Are you driving a truck? Are you in Mongolia on work in a hotel? Wherever you are, just be there. Be there. If you're brushing your teeth, pay attention to brushing your teeth. If you're talking to your daughter on FaceTime, pay attention to your daughter on FaceTime. Too many of us are trying to do too many things at the same time, and by doing that, we're doing none of them.
I love that advice. Neil, I truly, truly appreciate you spending some time with us today. And to our listeners, if you have not read Neil's most recent book, and if you have not read or followed him, definitely do that. But if something resonated with you, give him a shout on email because he is an awesome guy and he is definitely awesome. Thank you, Neil, and I hope you and I can definitely connect again soon.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to episode number 246. Neil is quite an impressive individual, and he has a very natural way of making you think about things. He discussed how he has these untouchable days where he not only unplugs completely, but how on those days he is actually 10 times, if not more productive. So as we wrap up today's episode, I would like to focus on a couple of items that Neil presented. When is the last time you took out an actual pen and wrote in either a journal or a notepad? Neil does this every single morning, and he focuses on three things. He writes, I will let go of, I am grateful for, and I will focus on. I challenge you today to put down your phone or to leave it in a different room for at least 30 minutes. I challenge you to unplug and completely remove yourself from your device. No matter what you do for that 30 minutes, or perhaps who you are with, be there and 100% be fully present. And always remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.